Welcome everyone to this explainer. Today we're diving into something that completely flips conventional wisdom totally on its head. We're going to unpack this concept of high riding IQ. Based on some pretty incredible insights from cognitive science and motorcycle psychology, we're looking at what actually goes on inside the brain of a truly elite motorcycle rider. Get ready, because this is going to be an eye-opening journey into how the human mind interacts with the physical world at high speeds. And honestly, the best part? These lessons don't just apply to people on motorcycles, they apply to literally anyone navigating the road today. So let's start with a really basic question. What does a genius on two wheels actually look like? I mean, when we picture a highly skilled rider, our minds almost automatically default to the stereotype, right? We picture the fastest person on the road, someone aggressively weaving through heavy traffic like they're playing an arcade video game, just fueled purely by adrenaline and lightning-fast reflexes. But cognitive scientists who actually study motorcycle psychology tell us that this image is completely wrong. Okay, let's dive into this. There's just a massive gap between the myth and the reality of riding intelligence. The myth totally relies on raw, reactive skill, acting fast when things go wrong. But the reality? A rider with a high riding IQ is often the quietest, most invisible person on the road. It's like nothing ever seems to go wrong around them. And why is that? Well, because true riding intelligence is really a measure of how your brain reads, predicts, and responds to an ever-changing environment as a highly disciplined processor. Which brings us to our first major psychological theme. Section 1, the invisible processor. This brings up a term psychologists call proactive hazard anticipation. Basically, high IQ riders just assume other drivers cannot see them. Period. But it's not pessimism. It's a deliberate, calculated survival strategy. Instead of waiting to react to a danger, their brain is running this quiet, continuous background process. They're constantly scanning, predicting, and adjusting their position before a threat even materializes. They're looking for stuff like front tires just barely beginning to drift, or a driver's head slightly turning in the cabin before a lane change actually happens. This mental model literally never switches off. And here's the hard data to back that up. Studies on rider cognition show that experienced, high-awareness riders identify hazards an average of 2 to 3 seconds earlier than lower-awareness riders. Now, 2 to 3 seconds might just sound like a tiny blip of time, right? But when you're on a motorcycle going highway speeds, that gap is absolutely everything. It is literally the difference between life and death. That extra time gives them the space to react smoothly rather than just panicking and slamming on the brakes. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how they handle spatial threat modeling. High IQ riders don't just blindly pick a spot in a lane and park themselves there. They actively secure escape routes. They might shift to the left third of the lane approaching a bend to open up the absolute earliest possible view into that curve. Or they'll shift right behind a slow vehicle to map out the lowest risk locations. They treat their lane position as a very active, deliberate cognitive process. Basically, where you sit on the road dictates exactly how many escape routes you have when something inevitably goes wrong. Moving right along to Section 2, trusting the quiet signals. So intuitive risk detection is a really fascinating phenomenon. A highly intelligent rider will often just roll off the throttle and reduce their speed, not because they clearly see a danger, but because something just kind of doesn't feel right. Their brain acts as this massive pattern-matching engine. It's constantly comparing the current environment against literally thousands of stored riding scenarios. Maybe a waiting car is sitting at a slightly unusual angle, or an engine sound just out of view seems a little off, almost like a mechanical cough. Most people totally ignore these quiet signals, but high IQ riders, they treat them as hard, undeniable data. Remember this takeaway: slowing down costs almost nothing. Ignoring it can cost everything. That intuitive alarm bell ringing in their head, it's not paranoia. It's actually their accumulated experience processing reality way faster than words can even articulate. They trust that quiet signal completely, and honestly, it's what keeps them out of trouble. So the crucial point is that high riding IQ isn't some fixed state. It completely relies on dynamic situation awareness. This is a concept heavily studied in aviation safety, and now we're seeing it applied to motorcycles. They treat every single ride as a living, breathing puzzle that's always changing. If a lower awareness rider spots some gravel on a turn, they might immediately tense up. But a high IQ rider, they effortlessly absorb that new information, instantly recalculate their braking distance, adjust their line, and scan for whatever caused the gravel in the first place, all simultaneously and totally without any drama. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how they pull this off, by reading behavioral prediction signals. Well before a car ever flicks on a turn signal, it's already broadcasting its intentions. High IQ riders watch for the vehicle's weight subtly shifting. They look for micro movements in the front wheel. They even notice if a driver's eyes haven't moved to check their mirrors. They read these micro signals automatically, essentially turning every other driver on the road into a data source. It's very much like a pro poker player reading the subtle tells at a card table. Let's jump into Section 3, the ego-free ride. When we compare ego-driven riding directly with high riding IQ, the research is incredibly clear. Psychology studies on expert practitioners in high-risk environments show that ego and performance anxiety are the two absolute biggest disruptors of cognitive bandwidth. Think about it. If your brain is super busy worrying about how cool you look or stressing about keeping up with a group, you literally have significantly less processing power left to actually detect threats. High IQ riders, they're completely indifferent to how they look. By making peace with looking totally ordinary, they free up their brain for the one job that actually matters out there: survival. Psychologists refer to this as having a high internal locus of control, meaning they make decisions strictly based on their own internal standards. If they're out on a group ride and the visibility suddenly drops, or they start feeling fatigued, or even if the road is just unfamiliar, they'll happily become the slowest rider in the pack. They have totally decoupled their personal identity from their speed. They'll slow down without a single apology and zero anxiety, simply because the road conditions dictate their pace, not the group's ego.
Which brings us to our fourth section, the master mindset.
So let's look at a question that really shifts our perspective here. Why is safety gear completely non-negotiable for these experts? We tend to think of wearing a helmet or a jacket as just, following the rules or maybe being a little overly cautious on a super hot day. But for the expert rider, the reasoning actually goes much, much deeper into their psychology. It all comes down to consistent risk mitigation behavior. They have this deeply internalized understanding of probability. They know they can't predict which ride will be the one where a crash happens, so absolutely every single ride gets treated like it might be the one. Furthermore, putting on the gear is an actual ritual. It physically signals to the brain that high-level attention is now required. Interestingly enough, behavioral studies show that riders who skip their gear for quick trips actually tend to be mentally less engaged on those trips too. So the gear is a psychological commitment made before the engine even turns over. Let's move to and see how this builds directly into their post-ride habits through metacognitive reflection. Most people finish a drive or a ride, turn off the engine, and just move on with their day, right? Not high IQ riders. They actually take the time to mentally replay their ride. They'll analyze a corner that felt slightly off or think about a lane change that worked out but maybe relied just a little bit too much on luck. They're constantly thinking about their own thinking, extracting vital lessons without needing a traumatic crash to teach them. And this quiet little habit, it compounds over time into just extraordinary skill.
They operate under one core philosophy. Competence is a direction, not a destination. They possess a seriously deep growth orientation. These are the folks reading crash reports, actively studying their craft, and seeking feedback long after they've mastered all the basics. They know the harsh truth. The literal moment a rider believes they have nothing left to learn, their riding IQ begins to quietly decline. The road can always throw something new at you, and their curiosity is for sure their best predictor of long-term survival.
Let's bring all of these fascinating themes together in Section 5, Redefining High Riding IQ.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway is this. High riding IQ isn't about fearlessness at all. It's about pure, relentless awareness. True motorcycle mastery is not about being the most technically gifted, the fastest, or the most daring person out there on the asphalt. It is entirely about maintaining a highly disciplined mind that constantly questions the environment and relentlessly updates its understanding of reality.
And I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought. The very best riders on the road are the ones whose internal monologue constantly asks just one simple question. What am I missing right now? Because the road is never static. It's always changing. And the riders who understand that deeply are the ones who get to keep riding the longest. Next time you head out on a journey, whether that's on 2 wheels or 4, I challenge you to ask yourself that exact question. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.